snowing outside. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for coming in person, those of you who are here, and thanks for joining us on Zoom. Tonight we're going to talk about, we've got Dani Nichols, Krayna Castelbaum is on her way. Kat Mattingly is here with us on Zoom. And my wife Irene is right over there. And I'm here, and we're going to talk about writing classes and writing workshops, and our thoughts on those and why we think you should attend them and why we think we should attend them as well. But first, I'm going to go over the website, talk a little bit about what we're going to do this year. Then we have a featured reader, and we'll just get into it. So think of questions as we go, because basically what we're going to do with this panel is we're all going to talk a little bit about our thoughts on writing workshops and writing classes, and then it's basically a Q&A. So think of questions as we're going along, stuff you'd like to hear about. Okay, so I'm going to do a screen share, hopefully. And I'm going to share the Central Oregon Writers Guild website. And y'all see that? I hope, yes. Kat, nod if you see that. Okay, good. Okay, so this is the landing page for the Central Oregon Writers Guild. And on the left side are all the events, the Writers Guild events, and on the right side are all the events, other events that are going on in the Central Oregon area. So here's our January meeting. Why should I attend classes and workshops? February, we have Sydney Swanson, who's going to talk about the interplay between character and world in fiction. My colleague at OSU, Catherine Malsinski, is going to do a talk on self-centered first-person narration in fiction. She's also going to do a workshop. And so the workshops are quarterly. They're held on Saturdays. They're 1 to 4 in the Brooks room. And Catherine's going to do our first workshop, kind of in that continuation of that first-person narration. In April, we have Shelby Little, who's going to talk, who is a writer and marketer, and she's going to talk about how to shout about your work without losing your voice. So how to market yourself. Carrie Chappett, local published author, writes historical fiction. She's going to talk about history with a side of action, how to write historical fiction that keeps readers hooked. In June, our own Julie Swearingen and Eric Frank are going to expand on that author platform thing that we did at the end of last year. So we're going to talk about how to build your author platform. And then Julie's going to actually do a website where you will build your author website. So you'll come in and you'll actually build it during the course of the class. You'll have an author website when you walk out. July, Michael Stephen Gregory is going to be putting on a writers conference in September here in town at Eagle Crest. And Central Oregon Writers Guild is hopefully going to be part of that. But he's going to talk about how to attend a writers conference, what they're all about, and give us hopefully some details about that writers conference that's going to take place in September. Lauren Oberwerger visited us 3 years ago, did a fantastic workshop. And she's a great presenter, and she's going to be our presenter in August. My beautiful wife Irene is going to talk about poetry, how writing and reading poems can make all your writing better, and something that Irene does a really, really good job of. She's a fantastic poet and really understands poetry. There were a lot of requests to learn more about poetry, but she's really good at crossover of how to bring poetry into your work. And she'll be doing a workshop in September to talk more about that. October, Kristen Dorsey, our old friend Kristen Dorsey, who always does great presentations, The Healthy Writer, Writing for Health and Healthy Writing Habits. November, we'll get one of the instructors from the OSU MFA program to come and do a talk. That's still under construction, and hopefully they'll do a quarterly workshop for us. And then in December, we'll have our holiday potluck. So over on the right side, events that are taking place that we know of in Central Oregon in the writing world. So all kinds of stuff over there. We'll keep that updated. There's stuff from February there too. February will get updated at the beginning of next month too. So any new stuff that comes in will get added into that. Upcoming conferences and events, the Forge writing program that Irene and I and Ellen Santasero run. We've moved the start date of that till September, so we're taking applications still for that. Writers Retreat in Mexico in February, a couple of them in Mexico in February there. So excellent time to go to Mexico is February. All right, I'm going to stop my share. If anyone has questions about anything as we go along here, feel free to put them in the chat. When we get to the Q&A for the panel, you can just unmute yourself and pop your question out there. A little bit of Zoom etiquette. I know we all probably know how to do this better than just living our normal lives now, but if you want to watch just what's going on in the panel, you can click on the one that says Deschutes Public Library Programs, where you see me sitting at a table, and you can click on the three little dots and pin that one. And and then you won't see all the other faces. If you want to see the people who are live, you can go to your view screen and you can say hide non-video participants, and all the ones where you just see the names will sort of disappear, and it'll clean up your screen a little bit more. All right. We're going to go into our featured reader. You know what? Before we do that, it's the beginning of the year. Does anybody have any exciting news that they want to share?
I do.
What is it?
I submitted something to Little Somethings Press, like back in August. I forgot completely about it. And I got an email recently. I started to read it. I thought, oh yeah, it's one of these emails. Thanks for all your hard work. But then it said I was going to be in it. So there will be an author reading in Tempe or Arizona in June. So I hope you all come to Tempe, Arizona to hear me read.
All right. You're going to Tempe in June?
That's when the reading's supposed to be. Yep.
All right. All right.
Nice and warm.
Trish has something.
So I'm giving a TED Talk in April, at the end of April in Delaware. And they are creating this anthology, this book of other TED Talk speakers. Some have already done their, it's a TEDx talk instead of TED Talk. Some of them have already done their TED Talks. Others of them are like me, who are going to do our TED Talk. So there are 10 of us, and they've put us all in an anthology. So we wrote a chapter about our journey of how we decided to share this idea worth spreading, and kind of what the talk is going to be about and what we hope to accomplish, and like preparing for it, all that kind of stuff. And the book is coming out. They're releasing it the day of the event on April 27th, and then it'll be available on Amazon after that.
All right.
So I'm going to be published in a publication this year, which, you know, I'm excited about that.
Good for you. Anyone else? Andrew?
Exciting. I participated in NaNoWriMo and managed to push out 30,000 words.
All right.
So I had a partner and we were doing it together. She managed to get 50,000 words in 23 days.
That's great. In 23 days. So she did the short version. So Andrew, Smiley was just telling us that he did 30,000 words in NaNoWriMo and his partner did 50,000. So congratulations on that. Now comes the editing, right? Mary, you mentioned that you got the rejection email that wasn't the rejection email. I got one of those last week from the Baltimore Review, and it looked like all the other rejections that I've gotten. And they said, we would be excited to publish your short story in the winter edition. Yeah, I was just about to delete it. So glad I didn't do that. And they also asked me to read the piece and send them an MP3, which I did today. So they attached that to the publication. So they do an online version of it, and then they'll do an anthology, a collection of all the everything they printed in June this year. So I'll have an actual book. Also exciting news, and that's just here to make you jealous, is that I'm going to the Key West Literary Seminar tomorrow. If the airport is working, I got a scholarship to the Key West Literary Seminar, and so that starts Thursday. So I'm trying to catch a plane tomorrow morning. We'll see if that works. So yeah. All right. Thanks. All right. Let's get on with our featured reader. You know what? I might just have you sit here. Does that work? Yeah. Okay. And I'll just kind of put this like this. And so Amy Berlin, who is one of our board members and has been instrumental in the publication of the anthology the last 2 years, and the production of her children the last 3 years. And she did both at the same time, which is pretty cool. Is going to read to us tonight. Here's Amy's bio. Amy Berlin is a positive person who writes depressing fiction and poetry. She has no credentials, has not yet been published in a literary journal, and keeps writing anyway. That's Amy. But Amy is a fantastic writer, and I happen to know that firsthand. And here she comes. All right.
So happy I'm speaking this month. There's like no one in the room and everybody's on Zoom. So, okay, this is called Whale Watching, and it's broken up into 2 parts. So part 1, on the sea. I forgot to pack my hat. I should have sensed a foreshadowing of things lost as I squinted into the sharp daylight of the Pacific Ocean. The boat begged for deeper waters, a bridal veil of soft white foam drifting behind us. We took a seat on the top deck away from the tourists and began to scan the horizon for signs of life. Without the hat, there was no escaping the sun, so I tilted my head back, welcoming the freckles I'd earned, knowing how someday I'd trace each one and remember how it felt to be near you that day on the sea. A hum of bodies crested starboard, and in the distance I could see the crescent moon of a tail waning into the water. Then, just as suddenly, there she was, a great black whale. Growing up on the California coast, I had never seen a whale before. I'd never even stopped to think of any life beneath the ocean's surface. How could something exist if I couldn't see it? As a child, I needed to hold things, to weigh them in my greedy, outstretched hands. Brown paper school lunch bags, a ghost of a smile, the scrape of your calloused hand tucking me into bed at night. Now, here was this thing I never knew existed, never knew that I needed. A slippery giant moving alone in an ocean that outsized my own landlocked loneliness. As she dipped down into the silken water, I held my breath just as she did, wishing I could join her. Part 2, Memorial. The boat held 17 of us. We rocked as we exited the harbor and out into the sea, the place where real violence happened. The rugged California coast fragmenting right before our eyes. Salt licked at the open cuts on our heels, calves, the palms of our hands. The smell of seaweed somewhere in between sweet and swamp. We held each other. No one wanted to be the first one to say it. I couldn't look when the ashes were poured, but I knew it was over when I stopped tasting dust. Afterwards, I kept my eyes on the horizon. So much bright water kept stinging my eyes, so much sea, so much endless empty space of what I imagined forever must feel like, this newly formed distance between us. Somewhere out there was the whale. I could feel her moving beneath me in the cool water, waiting for me to join her. Eyes closed, we swam together. Salt water blew like wind against my skin, my shoes, then socks slipped off. Legs fluttering, I swished beside her. We swallowed the cold, let it fill us until we were thoroughly quenched. Slowly, my mind cleared as thoughts ascended, each one shimmering upwards and joining the other flecks of sunlight sparkling on the water surface. Someone towards the front of the boat gasped. I opened my eyes just in time to see a splash and the gentle wave of the whale's tail as she slipped delicately back into the water. My body felt dry but itched from the salt. Wind whipped towards us, scented with the hot, dry grass from the headlands above. The daylight had shifted. The sun, lower now, the light halo soft, letting me scan the horizon once more. I couldn't see her, but I could still feel her swimming beside me, sometimes drifting away, but always watching. I couldn't measure the distance between us, but maybe that was the point.
I always love listening to Amy's work or reading Amy's work. Beautiful, beautiful sensory, lots of, yeah, I think you got all the senses in there. You probably had a little checklist, taste, smell, all that sort of stuff, but you feel really present there. The body feels very present. I felt that water and smelled the salt and felt the dust and everything. Beautiful. Okay, we're gonna jump into, so Dani and Irene and Krayna's on her way, I think, so she'll join us when she gets here, but I think, I know. I'm gonna put this kind of in the middle of us so we can talk into it. These probably are of no use at this point, right? Or no? Hello? Oh, will it just echo then if we're talking into here? And you all can hear us, right? Okay. Okay. So we're gonna do sort of self-introductions and talk a little bit about what our thoughts are about writing workshops and classes, taking them, giving them, so on and so forth. Kat, do you want to go first
Sure.
on the spot
Okay, so
here?
yeah. Well, I'm
And
Kat
then-
Mattingly, and I have a half a dozen books out there, fiction. One of them's a short story collection. One of the things you sent us as a prompt was to maybe talk about writing classes we'd taken. So every year for maybe, I think, 7 or 8 years, I used to go to the Maui Writers Retreat every summer. It's a 6-week master's level intense study. It was 6 days, not 6 weeks. I'm sorry. Taught by a New York Times bestselling author, would be a different one each time, and just invaluable information. And then I would stay for the conference where I would go to a lot of workshops, and then I would spend time with the agents and editors, especially after hours in the bar, which is where I probably got my best education about writing and the process from them in terms of getting published. So that's kind of my backdrop on taking classes myself. And then as far as what I teach the novel and memoir writing and short story and flash fiction. It's another class. I'm going to be teaching Get Your Book Published in the spring. As far as my teaching style and why I think it's important, I think that my students have kind of made it clear why the classes were important to them, why any class, I mean, not just mine, but anybody teaching a writing class, anybody taking a writing class, some of the highlights of being able to do that, at least for in my class, I just have written down a few things that they have said or sent me. Actually, I asked them, I say, what did you get out of the class? You know, so they sent me this. It's just short and I'm going to read it. Kat's curriculum is well organized. She has broken down the content into easily digestible definitions and examples, which is very helpful. We learned a lot about what makes good storytelling and the critical questions a writer must ask themselves when evaluating their own work. The inclusive classroom environment she creates caters to both novice and experienced writers and allows for a sense of community that enhances the experience. Class discussions were always interesting and informative. Her writing prompts got our creative juices flowing. Sharing our work allowed us to see all of the different angles and emotions that can be evoked from one simple prompt. The exercises built beginning and intermediate writers' confidence and skills by encouraging us to step outside our comfort zone regarding point of view or tense, tone, or mood. We were able to take risks and challenge ourselves. The last person wrote, I hoped to learn essential building blocks for fiction and memoir. Was not disappointed. It was a low stress setting which allowed for learning at your own pace, yet promoted creativity. Students were encouraged to share their work, but it wasn't mandatory. Kat brought students out of their shells. Most people were sharing by the end of the course. She was particularly adept at boosting confidence, remembering each of her students' storylines and providing individual feedback. I came away from the class more confident and was inspired to work on my first novel. And I think those are some things you get out of taking classes. Confidence in your own work, being able to just discuss all the elements of writing, building community with your fellow writers, and you learn from how they write and what they write about, and just having those conversations, having a safe place to experiment with the different elements of writing, and to share your passion with others and what you're writing about. And let me just say really quickly, I want to congratulate everybody who had something wonderful happening this month going on with your writing that you shared. I think that's so wonderful. And I loved the reading. It was really awesome. And that's about it.
All right. Thank you. You want to go next? Yeah. All right. So I don't know, undo this that way. So, gallery. Okay. So you're in the middle.
Okay.
All right.
All right. My name is Dani Nichols. I am a local author and writer. I've been in the writing world for a long time, but I didn't start teaching workshops until I published a children's book. So I published a children's book last summer, in 22, and it has been surprisingly successful, not because I'm really good at anything. It just sort of happened. And so I started getting asked to teach workshops. So that was kind of how I got thrown into this world. But I personally have taken workshops for years and been part of Central Oregon Writers Guild for years. I've taken workshops from both Mike and Irene before, and through COCC and other places. And conferences, writers' conferences oftentimes have really great workshops, which can be shorter and seem a little bit, I don't know, they're more bite-sized. Sometimes they're more marketing focused, but I find that they can be really generative for just kind of discovering what to do next. That was kind of how I got started on the kids' book journey. Was I just realized I had polished a memoir to a shine of perfection, hired an editor, done the whole deal, and had multiple personal introductions to agents who had said that they were interested, who then passed. And so I was just I have to do something totally different, because otherwise I'm going to quit. I have to do something different. And so that's kind of what my workshops are a lot about, is second chances. Try something out of your comfort zone. If you've never written a kid's book before, that's okay. We'll figure it out together. It's a lot about just letting your inner child kind of play and being willing to try some of those stories. I think all of us had a favorite book as a child. So even just remembering some of that and kind of allowing yourself to get kind of caught up in that joy of storytelling. I think that's a lot of what children's literature is just kind of remembering why stories are so magical. And then oftentimes it grows into something else. A lot of people who've taken my classes then end up doing YA, or they end up turning it into a novel or something else, right? It doesn't have to stay a kid's book, but it's kind of a nice way to unlock that little secret cupboard, especially if you've been disappointed, which I know you can't be a writer and not be disappointed. So it's just reality. Sorry to burst your bubble if you're new. So yeah, so that's kind of is that what I was supposed to hear?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think you did an excellent job. Let's see here. Yeah, all right.
Good on the Krayna. She's going to follow that up.
Are you ready? All right, Krayna is here, everybody.
Hi, I did your work. Hello.
All right.
Talk to the camera there.
Talk to the,
Talk to the screen.
somewhere in there is a
Somewhere,
microphone.
I'm
Yeah.
okay,
She'll
okay.
catch you too. right?
Okay,
I
thank
think
you.
so.
Hi.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Okay.
I appreciate being invited. My name is Krayna Castelbaum, and I call myself the creativity instigator. So I like to instigate writing, among other things, wherever and however I can. So I have benefited from, you asked about our own experience, right, with writing workshops and poetry workshops, and no question I've benefited. I mean, I've been writing and going to workshops for years. And I suppose the best thing for me in those experiences is when there's a lot of space for my own spontaneity to come alive and my own imaginative impulses to just pour out onto the page without first like trying to sort it. You know, like I used to try to edit as I went along, which was a very bad idea, which you've talked about a lot. So I don't know if I think space, but also I've loved the confluence of, you know, conversation with other people, their ideas and like their way of thinking and that are so different than mine. So it feels like a movement of going into my own space, my own studio, into solitude, and then moving out into community. It feels like a kind of praxis that brings about a lot of juice. So yeah, I've really appreciated that process. And I feel like it has made me a better writer. You know, like it really has. I've learned a lot. So I won't go into the gory details because I probably got 2 minutes. So as far as my own offerings, I call them play shops, not because people have to, you know, like roll on the floor and make jokes and stuff like that, but because I want people to be able to use creativity practices as vehicles for the convergence of imagination and authentic self-expression. And I want people to use them as antidotes to the heavy socialization and the, you know, the way we get domesticated and boxed in. I want, for me, progress is when people can lose themselves to experimentation and spontaneity. And so in the play shops that I do a lot of things, but one of the things I've been doing for many years are poetry play shops, you know, every month. And people routinely come who say, I'm not a writer, you know, I'm like, good, great. Well, let's play, you know, let's just mix it up. And by the time we're done, everybody in that room has found something within themselves that makes them go, wow, I had no idea I could do that. That's like, I love that. That's what I live for, is to create possibilities like that. So, yeah, when people can get out from under their preoccupations, well, is it any good? And the only rule I have is, you know, when you want to share, you don't start with, you know, well, like if I'd had a few more minutes, this might have been like pretty good or decent. It's kind of sucks, but you know, like we don't do that. And I suspect you don't either. That's the only rule I really have, is to ditch the apology. These are all drafts and they're promising. And so I think that's probably 5 minutes.
All right.
So I will listen.
Yay. Great. We ready, Mike?
Born ready, baby. Hi, everybody. A nice intimate group. We are really quiet though. It feels like this room feels super quiet. Although I super enjoyed your reading and heard every word, which was a compliment I got recently on a reading. I took it as high praise. Yeah. Also, sweet and swamp. Chef's kiss on that.
The forge right here, you guys.
Yeah, the forge. Sometimes I say facilitator, sometimes I say instructor, sometimes I say teacher. It really depends on the environment. You know, it is a role for me and a responsibility and not an identity per se. My experience receiving instruction is pretty broad. Michael and I both attended the inaugural MFA cohort that's at OSU Cascades almost 11 years ago now. And we were 7 people who became 8 people, a very tight, small, intense community, and kind of one big workshop. So I think I was listening to Dani and Kat, they bringing in all of these things to talk about the experience of the workshop. I think, you know, a lot of people come to workshops motivated by their ambition, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like what you want for your writing career, what you want for your writing, how you want it to be seen in the world, you know, the prize or one of the prizes, as it turns out. And workshops can absolutely facilitate that path. But I think the great surprise, and something you all were sort of nodding to, is the experience itself. Because writing is really lonely. It's very solitary. And I think this idea of how you bring in interaction and community to an art that is very difficult to integrate socially, right? Like dancers dance together. And I used to cook for the Artist in Residence program at Caldera every Thursday night. So they had, you know, a little bit of everybody there. They had dancers, they had musicians, they had writers. Writers would always be in a corner, sort of mumbling to themselves, and everybody else, you know, would be having this exchange, right? Like other arts frequently practice that quite naturally. And this is kind of a different business. Right. So this idea of the workshop, it hits so many different buttons. Sure, there's the craft knowledge. You know, sometimes that'll hit you and sometimes it won't. Sometimes it'll hit you 6 months or 6 years down the road, something that you've heard in a workshop. It's still happening to me, where I'll have a light bulb moment of something that happened years ago. So it's not always a direct relationship there. But this idea of community learning and interaction and listening to our own tries and attempts, you know, with that sort of mutual, if you're in the right class, they're fostering this, you know, safety is a tricky word in my lexicon, but this idea of yes, you know, yes to share, yes to experiment, yes to push into a direction that maybe you haven't been before. I love this idea that you write one thing and it becomes something else. I took an online workshop. Pandemic was great for this. It was almost good for nothing, but it was great for this. Were all of these online workshops from across the country. And all of these people that I got to understand how their teaching worked and how their own work was. And I remember things, and a writer named Edward C. Corral talked about changing boxes. And this concept of, there's also something called radical revision. Monica Yoon talks about this, where you have a piece. And then one way of looking at revision, which isn't exactly revision, is you take a seed from that piece and you write something else. And maybe it takes a different form or a different tone. And maybe it evolves into something completely different. But you're sort of connecting the subconscious. I was thinking this here, and I'm going to develop it here. And then all of a sudden, you know, you have the other thing. I also think the other thing that workshops do, it has done this in my experience, is mitigate the no. I wish you all New York Times bestsellers in your first submission, but I experienced a lot of rejection. And when I say a lot, I ain't kidding, a lot. And that's less difficult for me now than it was at one time. And it still ain't easy. And I'll tell you, what did this workshop do is remind me that I have a practice and I do have a community, and that I do this mostly not for that yes, although that yes is fantastic when it comes, feels great. But I mostly don't do it for that reason. And the workshop will remind me about the joy. I love the word, you know, joy gets thrown around a lot, but there is joy in doing something that that you're interested in, you know, and are building mastery in. And I think my time's almost up today too, but I was talking to an MFA student today, and she said, you know, you said something to me about a year ago and I didn't believe you. And then something happened. And what I had said to her, because she was deeply upset about not having a chance to have a one-on-one mentorship with a situation had fallen through and she wasn't going to have that. And I said, you know, you're not going to believe this, but at some point after this program, it is incumbent upon you to be your own mentor, to be your own best guide. You're always going to want community. You're always going to want the good, experienced eye or the someone who can respond to your work. But ultimately, buck stops here. And workshops help foster that kind of confidence and that kind of energy to try something new that I think y'all were talking about.
Thank you. Here. So I've been taking writing classes since I was a little kid. I got a Bachelor of Fine Arts in college when I was way younger than I am now. And writing has always been inside of me. And I have to imagine that if you're in this room or on this Zoom meeting, that writing does something for you. The act of writing itself, to me, makes me happy. I don't have to publish anything. I don't have to share it with anybody. Nobody has to read it and tell me how great it is. Sitting and writing is a world that I get into that makes me happy. Mostly. There are there's that time when you can't remember, you can't think of what the hell your character is going to do next or whatever. But yeah, once you start overthinking or whatever, but writing itself has always made me happy. And like I said, it's not been, it's not somebody saying, hey, Mike, I spent most of my life in the culinary world, and I was teaching at the culinary school, and I was teaching a career success class. And I asked all the students in the room, I said, how many people in this room, how many of you have been told you're a good cook? Everyone raised their hand, right? That's why they came to culinary school, is because somebody else told them they were a good cook. Nobody has to tell me I'm a good writer. I know I'm a good writer, to me, and that's all that really matters, right? It's nice to share it and bring it out into the world and to make that grow. But I've always loved writing and always taken writing classes. And the thing that writing classes and writing workshops do is it revitalizes that for me. As Irene said, it's a really lonely thing to do. I'm teaching a tech writing class, and we're going to have a group project, and we have to do collaborative writing. They're still going to write the things on their own. Even in a group setting, even in collaborative writing, you're always writing on your own, right? Unless you're going to do a word and then somebody else does a word and somebody else does a word, and then that gets into some surrealist parlor sort of thing, which is also fun. And you might even do something like that. You do. So the thing that workshops and classes do for me, and I went for a long stretch not writing. I mean, I wrote little notes and stuck them in my pocket and that sort of thing. I always did that, and I always thought like a writer. I'd always look at something and make a story out of it or whatever. But the thing that got me back into writing was going back to school. And I have to tell you, I was accepted into the MFA program, and as soon as I was accepted into the MFA program, I took an online writing course before the MFA program so that I was prepared for the MFA program, right? When I went to culinary school, I was a bartender, and I asked my boss if I could do prep work for the few months before I went to culinary school so I could get my knife skills down, right? I don't like to walk into something not knowing what I'm doing. I take writing workshops all the time. I take writing classes all the time. I pick stuff off the internet. I still do it. Sometimes I take workshops from friends and they're like, oh, you're not going to get anything out of this. You already teach workshops. I never don't get something out of a workshop. There's always a takeaway that I get from a workshop, and I'm always thinking in terms of my own work. And like I said, it revitalizes how I write. I mean, I've been writing pretty consistently since I got out of the MFA program, and I hadn't been for the 30 years prior to that, right? And like I said, whenever I'm feeling a little slack, there's so many little writing workshops and little things you can do online. There's a lot of stuff going on in town. There's author readings that you can go and you can talk to people, and you just get that juice back. And as Irene said, it's so lonely. It's so easy to not do it. It's so easy to find other stuff to do, right? And this world of classes and workshops is the thing that gets you going. The way that I And when I said earlier that I think like a writer, to me, that means that I make stories out of things, right? Life goes on. Life was going on before I was born. It's going to go on after I'm dead. My life is not a story. It's a series of things that happen, right? But I like to make stories out of those things. And that's what we do when we share stories. We take a segment and we put some meaning behind it, right? Between this little piece of life, and we put some meaning behind it. We compare our feelings and emotions and life and death with a whale. And that puts story to things. It says, this is a frame that I'm going to look at something, and something changes during that period of time. And we see that change. And to me, it affects me, and hopefully it affects my reader. And then we're not going to talk too much about critique groups and that sort of stuff, but this is where we share that stuff. And then people say to us, here's what I see on that. And you say, oh, well, I didn't intend that. So now I have to change it. Or perfect, that's what I meant to say. I teach story when I in everything. Like I said, I'm teaching technical writing at OSU. I teach creative nonfiction. I teach comp classes. I teach argumentation. I'm always talking about story. There's always story, and that's how we look at the world. There's Maslow's hierarchy. We all familiar with that pyramid where we have our physical needs, and then we move up into love and relationships and all that sort of stuff. I think that while we're hunting and building our homes and making a fire and getting warm, we're telling stories. I think that the very lowest level of Maslow's hierarchy is story. I think it's in everything, in absolutely everything that we do. And that's what I teach, and that's what I love to talk about. And that's how I focus most of my writing workshops is around that idea. That's me. So maybe let's just let's see what we got for questions here. So shout them out if you're in the room, and if you're online, feel free, like I said, to put them in the chat. Barbara has asked to please tell us all the speakers' names again. That's Krayna Castelbaum. I'm Mike Cooper. That's Dani Nichols. And that's Irene Cooper. And on the screen there is Kat Mattingly. All right.
That was an easy
Questions?
one.
Yeah.
I managed that first question.
You've done good, Mike.
All right. Amy, question.
What was the most unexpected piece of advice that you've heard that has elevated your writing? And I would underline unexpected.
All right. So the question was, what's the most unexpected piece of advice that you heard that elevated your writing? Who wants to start with that one?
I have an answer, but I don't know if it's what you're looking for. So in the process of selling my kids' book, I went to the Pacific Northwest Booksellers Association event last spring. And it was kind of a crazy thing that I even got invited, and it was sort of this wild experience. And everything about that event completely burst my bubble about writing in general. Like, there's so much of how the sausage gets made as far as like how booksellers make their decisions about what books to sell, how books become bestsellers, how books are profitable or not profitable. Like, just all of that was so enlightening to me. I'm just sitting in the back of this conference room listening to all these booksellers talk, and these sales reps coming up and telling everyone, like, you know, how many awesome freebies they'll get if they order 100 copies of this book. And I'm like, that's why it's on display. Like, you know, it's just fascinating. It was such a fascinating kind of inside look into that world. And we're so lucky here in Bend. So many of our local bookstores are owned by friends of ours. You know, they're owned by people we know. So you could talk to people and kind of find these things out. But it was really neat to hear those stories. And then also, that's like the gritty side that I was disappointed to see. And then the wonderful side was the like genuine love that these booksellers had for good books, that they were so thrilled to talk to authors, that I got to be in an author kind of meet and greet thing, and people were just so excited to talk to me, even though I'm nobody, you know, I'm just so little. And just that, like, they saw quality and they were excited about it. And so that gave me a lot of hope. So I had a little bit of a downside, and then I had a lot of hope, and like, but there's still something to be said for taste and quality. And so I think just in the whole journey of publishing and like creating something beautiful, like just to remember that yes, you're up against the big dogs, but at the same time, there's something to be said for like making something beautiful. So I don't know if that's what you're looking for, but.
I hear stuff I don't expect all the time, Amy. It was something someone said in a workshop. There's the poet Viby Francis, and it was two words that I'm still trying to figure out, which was risk, clarity. And depending on my mood, I either hear that as take the risk of being clear, of saying it plainer than you think, maybe you have to. Sometimes I hear it with that ear. And then other times I hear it in its opposite way, which is to not be too afraid to give the reader a little more credit for some complicated thinking. So there's always this balance between, you know, writing that has been needlessly complicated maybe, or that is, it feels labored to get to its point, and something that is, you know, is reaching, and maybe you just ask a little more of the reader. And the part that's unexpected in that part is how much trust that involves. A lot, right? It takes a lot of trust to say, I'm gonna hope you get this.
A couple thoughts. I remember a long time ago taking a workshop, and I was exploring, of course, and the instructor wanted us to, I mean, this may sound elementary, but it was like, take the object and describe it without saying what it is in language, and, you know, paint a portrait that way. And, you know, before I had ever done that, that was like, wow, okay, how am I going to do that? So that was awesome. The other thing I do remember is being asked once to bring a series of poems, and what's your best among the group? Like, choose one. And I did. And then we went through it, and the questions about like, what makes this the best of the bunch by your lights, Krayna? And it was such an illuminating conversation. And then, you know, it was like, well, that's your bar. So, you know, that's what you're trying to hit when you know, do your work. So those were some helpful statements that I heard to answer your question. It's a great question, by the way.
It is.
Very good question.
Kat, how about you?
Well, I would say that Eileen touched upon the best advice I got back in the day was kill your darlings. Less is more. If there's a simpler way to say it, go with that. You know, I used to write a lot of poetry, and I think sometimes my early writing, when I switched to fiction, was maybe a little too flowery or a little too much. So just the whole cutting back was really made a huge difference in my trajectory of where my work went from that point on.
Like I said, I believe in story, and I think probably the most unexpected thing literally happened, and it's something that I still think about in that in that writing workshop that I took before I went to the MFA. It was an online writing workshop, and the author instructor identified the difference between story and plot, and I never thought that was a thing, right? I had always written plot, and there are a lot of people who write plot. A lot of the things that the sort of the action films that we watch on TV and that sort of stuff that we can just turn our brains off, right? Are just plot, 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 plot. I read I think Zen and the Art of Writing or something like that by Ray Bradbury, as one of my annotated bibliography books that I had to do in the MFA program. And there's a quote, and I just had to look it up so I didn't screw it up, that Bradbury says that plot is no more than footprints left in the snow after your characters have run by on their way to incredible destinations. And that to me is how plot works. So story exists before plot. Plot sort of fills in after story. And that's something that I still think about. I will a lot of times try and get my character across the room, out the door, and into their car or something like that, and do the thing, the physical thing. But the story is the thing that we're reading for, where we're actually there for the story, the emotional aspect of it, rather than the physical thing that's happening. Did that answer that? Yeah.
Can I add one more little thing?
Yeah.
Anything that you're kind of all getting at, I guess, in my ways, the question of does what you're writing, does this part of it serve the piece as a whole? You know, sort of think in terms of serving the piece rather than my own self in a certain way. It gives me some perspective that I find helpful.
All right. Good question, Amy. Who else has a question? You came out in this cold, frigid night, and you have to ask a question. Dan.
Was there one teacher from specific workshops that maybe really made the biggest impression on you, and why?
Mine was and I don't know if he made the biggest impression on me as a writer, but he certainly made a big impression on me. When I went to the MFA program, Geronimo Johnson was my my first term mentor, and Geronimo hadn't shown up at the residency. He was traveling from somewhere and he was late, so he showed up sort of the day of the thing, so we didn't have the sort of meet and greet, get to know thing. Geronimo is, I'm going to exaggerate this, but I think he's like 7 feet tall. Black man, and he wears a tight little hat like you're wearing, Dan. And we walked into the room, and this is another plot question, another plot thing. And he's very serious, or comes off very serious at the beginning, but really imposing soul. And we're workshopping a piece that one of the other writers spoke, and he said, so tell me the plot. And somebody starts telling about the story, and he goes, that's not the plot. And then we're all just freeze, right? It was like, oh shit. And then somebody else says something, goes, that's not the plot. And it was like, I love Geronimo. He's one of my favorite people and one of my favorite mentors throughout everything. But that moment put some seriousness into the thing. It's like, yes, this is fun and everything, but we're understanding how this works. I think that's what you learn in a class or a workshop, right? Is, for me, throughout my life, writing is this magical thing. I read something and I go, oh, wow, that's amazing. And I want it to stay magical. When you go to classes, and you may not want to do this, it's like taking your car apart and seeing how it works, right? You might just want to drive around in your car and just say, this is great. My car gets me from point A to point B, and it looks great. And I can put the top down, and it has all these buttons that do all these things. And you might not care how it works. And I was kind of that way when I went into the MFA, but as I got further into it, I understand how it works. And I can't look at writing the same anymore. Much like I can't look at food the same after I went to culinary school, right? but I know more about it now, and I know what I'm doing a lot with it. There's still magic. The magic is still there. There's still people who cook food that I cannot figure out how it's done. It's still there, but now I know more how to do it, and I can do it myself a little bit more. Yeah, that was just off the rails answer. Sorry. Who's next? So he showed us what the plot was of the story versus what the story. So we were saying it's about this girl who does this thing, because that's not the plot. And the plot is, as I said, this is what happened, this is what happened, this is what happens. So he taught us how to differentiate between the two.
Yeah, I would say, you know, I come across teachers all the time that impact me and impress me and leave me with something. I mean, there are a lot of good teachers out there. There are a lot of poor teachers out there. And the difference for me, it kind of coattails on what Michael was saying, is the instructor who very much takes the you know, the thing of the moment, the thing you're trying to learn seriously, takes the art seriously, is not prioritizing performance, either their own performance in the classroom or in the setting, or student performance per se. Performance is something that comes down the line. So the instructors that I feel most strongly about are the ones that I feel are artists. And by that, I don't mean necessarily they're publishing what have you, but they care that it gets done well. And they care that you as a student, that you know, that they can do the most they can to help you achieve your intention for the work. Not how they think it ought to be, not that, you know, that you find some sort of, or are given the opportunity to understand how to get into your work and come out of it on a different level. So it kind of has something to do with what Krayna was saying, is does it serve the piece? And there's a lot of egocentrism in writing, and that's appropriate. Like it's not a humble art, and it shouldn't be, right? Like I'm a professional writer. I wouldn't ask my neurosurgeon if it's a hobby, right? Like this is for real. And I want somebody who feels that way about the work itself. And that doesn't mean they can't be playful and all of that other stuff. But yeah, but it's about building muscle, building understanding, allowing space, and not performing in the classroom as an authority. One that makes you feel like it's a shared experience. Sort of like equity. Yeah. Good word.
So I think my answer is, I went to a 3-day memoir writing workshop with Dani Shapiro. She's a great memoirist, especially. She's written some novels as well that have been really wonderful, but she's just a really good writer. And she kind of, what Irene was saying, she just takes it seriously. And so it was kind of intended to be sort of this like generative, like just come and see what happens. There was like yoga and all that stuff, you know, and like fancy food and the whole deal. But the coolest thing was that the name of the weekend was The Stories We Carry. And so it was all about like everything in your life, what Mike was saying, what you guys have all been saying, like we're all carrying a narrative. And her encouragement to us was, let's find it. Let's like unearth that. And she did it with a lot of grace and a lot of creativity. But one of the coolest tools that she gave us, which I still use, is the practice, which maybe you guys have done, of writing several sentences, as many as you can, for as long as you can, that all begin with I remember. And just going down that list with the I remembers. And it's not, you know, I mean, it's not a earth-shattering concept, right? Even as I say it, I'm like, yeah, it's something that is taught in workshops. It's something that we all do. But I have returned to that so many times as just a way to kind of kickstart the juice or get me. I feel like the first 2 or 3 I remembers are dumb and then they get better and more honest the longer you go and the more that you're willing to dig. And so, you know, if you can give yourself 5 or 10 minutes to do it, by the time you're done, you'll have found something. But she gave us, I think, because of her experience and the grace with which she led us, I think that she gave us permission to do that digging in a way that was really special.
That's a pretty good example of risk clarity, is to not, as an instructor who's not afraid of the very simple prompt.
Yeah. Yeah. And to be willing to honor that as sacred, right? That it just because it's rather rudimentary doesn't mean something really cool can't come out of it, you know? Yeah.
Simple is not the same as simplicity. Right. I think I remember is like the most muscular prompt I've ever met in my world, but I love that you brought that up. Yeah. Yeah, I am remembering a workshop I took with Patricia Smith online. I think it was during the pandemic as well. And it was on persona poems. I love writing persona, reading persona poems and prose poems. And there was a man in the group, a white man, who was talking with her about appropriation, you know, and he referenced something like, you know, I know we are not, it's not cool to dip our pen in other people's blood. And, you know, he was asking a question as well about his own struggle, because he has this character that happens to be a Black woman. And she just got like on it. She was like, you know, your imagination is basically vast, and this world is vast. And so if you're going to speak in the voice of a Black woman, go for it, but know what your intention is, what your purpose is, why you're doing it. What is the point of this? So it's not, you know, like, she was very clear about that, but she just gave so much permission. She like blew the doors open on that thing. And I know, of course, other people would take issue with what she says, but I loved how she responded to that. And it really impacted me. And it still does, even now talking about it. It's, yeah, and especially coming from her, because I really respect her, her writing, her teaching. Yeah. Anyway, that's
All right.
my response.
Kat, how about you?
What exactly was the question? I didn't quite hear it.
Oh,
I kind of guessed, but I'm not sure.
Is there one, has there been one teacher, one or two teachers, or one teacher that, at a workshop seminar you've been to that really stands out, and why?
One teacher that's really impacted you, and why?
One teacher, you know, I cannot narrow it down to one teacher. I would say that the majority of the workshops and classes that I have taken, I've always come away with something special, and they have communicated to me some way in which I can either make my writing better, something is stuck with me at that time from their approach. All the best teachers, all the best workshops and classes. And what I love is just how I've always been so blown away by how every good instructor has something unique to offer that maybe I hadn't thought of, or I hadn't really examined thoroughly. No one person stands out in my mind, but every time, even now, I still go to workshops and I still take classes. I think it's a process that you should always do, no matter how old you are. And I'm ancient. If you're passionate about writing, you always want, like you touched on, Mike, you always want to go back and be refreshed by somebody else's point of view and what they have to bring to the table that you hadn't thought of, or you've forgotten about, or you've never examined, and they make it magical again. And so for me, there's not one person or one moment, but just accumulatively, I can't even imagine not taking classes and workshops, because they just make us better at our craft and help us really understand the art of writing even more thoroughly and on a different level. And that's really what it's all about.
All right, thanks. Other questions? Like I said, throw them in the chat if you're at home.
Would it be fair to just sort of comment? I don't have a question.
Yeah.
Per se.
Yeah.
And I'm one of those sad, lonely people who sit and write. And I was just trying to add it up, right? Probably 600,000 or 800,000. I don't have any problem. I believe better as time goes on. I sit there and I silently, or not silently, laugh. But are we going to workshops just to kind of, that every once in a while dip in the pool and mix with other people, or truly to make your writing better? Because I really believe that in order to write better, you have to write.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any problem with that.
So Eric's asking, so he said, he's got, would you say 600,000 or 800,000 words in boxes at home? And he's asking if going to workshops is about community or if it's about becoming a better writer. And it's basically a comment that he's making is that we have to write to get better. I think that that's absolutely true. I think if you watch somebody give you trumpet lessons online, and you listen to a lot of trumpet music and read about playing the trumpet and how the trumpet works and all that sort of stuff, you will probably not be the greatest. Is it trumpetist, trumpeteer, trumpet player, mouseketeer? I shouldn't have chosen trumpet. Let's go back to violin. Let's do that with violin and say violinist. So, but the idea is do you have to write to be a better writer? I think yes. I think that
It helps to read good writing.
it helps to read good writing, but it also helps to understand how that works too. Like I was going back to, there have been books, stories, poems, things that have severely impacted me in my life, changed my life, got to the end of it, and my life is different, right? And I say, that's amazing. Everyone should read this, right? But I don't really know how it worked. And as I learn the mechanics of writing, the techniques and that sort of stuff, I'm able to apply them to my own work. So absolutely, you have to write. I agree that I mean, you should read great works. You should say, I really like that and I want to write like that. But also to understand, I mean, there's a lot that goes into writing. There's a lot that goes into the craft of writing. There's structure, there's form, there's story, there's plot, there's how we define characters, there's how we create scenes, there's sensory, there's imagery, there's lyricism, there's information, there's all kinds of things. And there are ways to do those things. And so I study a martial art called Aikido, and the founder of Aikido practiced many martial arts for many years. And one day he said, one day I woke up and I forgot all technique. And that's when I truly understood Aikido. So once we learn all that technique, then we can set it aside. It's hard to break rules that you don't know. You're always sort of discovering the rules. So.
A couple of questions in that question. And also it's, you know, it's an umbrella statement to say, go take workshops. There are all kinds of workshops. So, and it's definitely true. And I've heard many writers say, you know, I'm not going to workshops anymore because I keep going to these one-day workshops and all I get are prompts, all I get are starts. That is a very common complaint. And I think that, you can write and read and become a better writer and even become the writer you want to be. I think that that's not off the table as a method for going about your own writing practice. The thing that I don't think that, well, perhaps a book could do it, but I think it is more likely if you are in an extended workshop that meets more than once, or if you have a writing group, it doesn't necessarily have to be a workshop, or if you have some community with other readers, that there will be, you know, if you're always going in the front door and exiting the back door, you can forget that there's an upper window and a side door and a basement underpass. And I think it's perspective that sometimes comes from having this community, not even just the lesson of it. But, you know, can you improve as a writer by simply writing and reading? Time-honored tradition.
In my own experience, it's now it's I do like to take cards. it has become, I have a harder and harder time getting through fiction writing, particularly good fiction, because I have to set it down all the time, because I appreciate the craft. As I try to write, especially book length fiction, I use sort of upscale as you go, technique, whatever. So now I recognize it more as it works. Sort of like taking part. Once you've done it a couple of times, you know, even though you don't know this make and model, you start to see it. And so, as I said, I have to put things down every once in a while, get contemplative and go, boy, that was really well done. I know where he's going. No, exactly what you're saying. That in the act of writing, you learn how to do it. I suppose that's a pretty cranky way of doing it. And it would be wonderful to walk into a workshop and be gobsmacked by something that catchy. But I have to say the classes and workshops that I have attended have not done that. And so you're very hesitant, not knowing who really is using parts and putting down. Yeah. People walk away. Not only did I know that already, it taught me.
Well, I have a question. My question is,
I'm going to bring this over near you so that people can hear your question. Go ahead.
I told you I was a quiet talker.
That's all right.
To piggyback off what Eric was saying, you know, the concern that you might get yourself into a workshop where it does nothing for you. So when you're evaluating workshops, because Irene, I think you said some people teach workshops and maybe they shouldn't be teaching workshops, right? Outside of those folks that are your friends or your colleagues, when you're evaluating a workshop, how are you sifting through to know what is worthwhile and what you think you might get out of it? What are kind of some of those things you're looking for when you're reading, you know, something you might sign up for?
So that's a little bit of a follow-up to what Eric was saying that you folks at home probably aren't hearing. That Eric has gone to some workshops where he hasn't gotten much out of them, and that his method has been to sort of take things apart on his own. So feedback to Amy's question. All right.
So I think it's a totally valid concern. There's a kind of joke saying of those that can't do teach. And I think that can be true. I think, you know, if sometimes you get into teaching because it's a little easier than doing the work of it. I don't think that anyone here is in that category. I think we're all writers who take writing seriously. But I've seen that in the world, you know. And so my advice is to read the writing of the person who is putting on the workshop. If they don't have credentials of that actual published work that you can Google and find, or they don't have a bio page that has a list of published work, then, I mean, maybe it's just me, but me personally, I would not take a class from someone who doesn't have published work and then also doesn't have work that I think is something that I could learn from, you know. That was part of how I decided to take Dani Shapiro's class. It was very expensive, but I felt like it was worth it because I've loved her for a long time and I've followed her and I just think her work is beautiful. And so I was like, I know I'm going to learn something, even if it's something, you know, just for me, I know I'll learn something because I feel a kinship with her. And so, yeah, I think having an instructor who, you know, has written things that have been out in the world and that you can read and say, I'd like to take this piece apart. I'd like to know how this works. How did they get me to feel this way? How did they get me to like get there with them? I think that's a huge piece of it.
Kat, you got any feedback on that one?
Well, I think that was excellent feedback. You really need to just do some homework on who's teaching the workshop. And that can tell you a lot about what you're going to get out of it, I think, you know, for sure. You don't want to just go sign up and go in there blindly because it has a great title. The workshop, right?
I want to pipe in on this. But even if it's free, you don't want to waste your time, right?
Yeah.
what I was going to say is actually just to round this out a little further, I don't have, if you look me up, you're not going to find a list of published works and books of poetry or prose. I mean, people come to me mostly through word of mouth, and because we've had conversations, and I've been teaching for 40 years, one way or another. And there are lots of reasons why I don't have anything published at this point, but there was a time where I felt really self-conscious about that. And that's gone. I'm just, and I think what you're saying is also valid. So it's a both and for me. I love to teach. I write every day. And I love being in community with people who want to experience, again, that movement between going internal and reaching out. And so there's that too. It's just a kind of interesting thing, isn't it?
And I would follow up by saying some workshops are intended to be an experience, and some are intended to take the car apart. They're all different, I think it depends on what you're looking for. It's can be so different. Most of the workshops that I teach are much more overview, experiential. A lot of it is inspiration, just for people who want to have thought about writing a kid's book and don't know how. And so that's a lot of it for me. But sometimes people come to me with like full kids books that they've already written, and they're like, please help me figure this out. So we can do that too. It just kind of depends, but like, just that tends to be my audience. So that's more, but yeah, I think it depends on what you're looking for.
I'm gonna just sort of agree with everybody, which is sort of not agreeing with anyone. I'm with Krayna. If you look up my publications, right now, you won't see much of anything. In a couple of months, you'll see a short story in the Baltimore Review. But I've written 2 novels, dozens of short stories. They're not in major publications out there in the world. And I've been teaching I've been teaching for 10, 12 years. I've been teaching writing for 8 years. And I think I'm a good teacher. But when I go to a workshop, part of it's on me, right? And if I go into that workshop and I go, oh, let's see if this person has anything that they're going to be able to teach me, it's not going to work out very well. Like I said, I go in with my pen in hand and my eyes open and my ears open, and I go, what can I get out of this? And I may miss a lot, but there's going to be 2 or 3 things that I'm going to get, and I'm going to take those home with me, and I'm going to, and I have done it. I've walked into workshops going, oh, this is going to suck. And it did, because I said it's going to suck. Right. I think you can always take something from every experience that you have. And that's life. I think, how you go into something, you can be open to whatever it is. Yeah. Anything you want to add to that? No. Okay. We have online questions here. Mary has asked, how important is it to take classes in genres that you don't write? Any thoughts on that? Somebody feeling?
Well, as the calendar said, I'm hoping everybody takes a poetry class, no matter what you write, because I'm a sort of evangelical instructor in that way. When Michael and I used to do blank pages workshops, we messed around a lot with genre, and a lot of people in Central Oregon Writers Guild write what has been traditionally called genre. Genre can be defined a lot of different ways, but largely speaking, if we say genre, we're talking about romance and mystery and sci-fi and all of these things that have sort of a specific expectations. And I think that is the core definition of genre, is a form that has specific expectations. I also think the publishing market is changing right now, and things can sort of blur genre or jump genre or combine themselves. And, you know, the literary and genre aren't necessarily oil and water now, which is and I don't think they ever have been, but I think now that there's more perspective. So, you know, big picture, small bite. So if I were to say somebody comes into a workshop and writes exclusively nonfiction, memoir, they write the stories of their lives. That's where they want to truck. It can be a very liberating experience to leave that very intimate personal narrative that can be so fraught with ideas of memory and truth and people who are living and people who are dead, and write in something that doesn't put its hooks into you like that. Writing a little piece of fiction or a little hermit crab essay that doesn't really, you know, use the personal eye. Extremely liberating, right? And I'm always going to argue that regardless, poetry can feel really elitist and have really high standards in people's minds. And it's because of all those high school teachers who told them that's how it is. But the idea that, you know, that the concision of language, and concision not meaning short, concision not meaning fewer words, concision meaning only the words that are necessary, and that can be quite long. This idea of what language can do and how poetry does that or seeks to do that is, whether you write poetry or not, can be deeply influential on how you write a sentence. So yeah, I'm a big believer in jumping the track.
My wee little ditty is that I think it's awesome to it's like life, you know, I like to expose myself to differences. And I always find when I do that, I end up with a creative imperative I didn't go in with, because something really new has now, like, is in front of me. So I like engaging with difference. So my answer is, yeah, I'm not always going in just to get something either, though. I mean, that's another thing. It's like, what am I getting? I want to be a participant, and I want to be part of a group sometimes, and I want to find my own voice within that. But I feel like it's important for me to do that. And I really appreciate what you also just said. Thank you. I'm done.
Well, as I shared with y'all, I got into this because I wrote a kid's book, which I never in my wildest dreams imagined I would do. So I was a journalism major in college. I had spent my entire adult life writing nonfiction, I worked for the Bulletin, I worked for papers, I worked for magazines. I did a ton of nonfiction work and wrote a memoir, and then decided to write a kid's book. So, yeah, so I think it's really, really helpful and powerful. And the experience of learning to write a kid's book, which I asked for a lot of advice, and I talked to a lot of people, and I went to workshops before I did it. Like, I didn't just like wake up one day with a genius kid's book idea. Like, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I got to now talk to people and figure out what to do. And then, you know, kind of feeling this and getting to then share this with other people. I mean, like, wow, this is a cool, look at what we can do. Who would have ever thought? Has now made me feel more courageous in other ways, you know, like it's made me feel like I could try and do poetry, which I've never tried before. And I could try and do fiction, which I've never tried before. And I just can spread my wings. And even in nonfiction writing, which is kind of my comfort zone, I find that I have a little bit more play and a little bit more room to grow, because I don't feel so like confined to the inverted pyramid. I'm not so stuck in the ways that I had written for so many years. And so I think, you know, if a workshop comes up that you're sort of interested in, that's something you never thought about, I would encourage you to try it, because you just never know, and something might strike you. And even if it doesn't become something you actually want to publish in or you actually want to do, I think it can make your core competency even better, kind of what Irene was saying.
Kat, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that broadening your perspective is always enriching. So I agree with everyone and what they said. It's just always a good idea to get outside of your comfort zone too, once in a while. I think that is always advantageous as a writer. Just being a little uncomfortable in a setting and then becoming more familiar with it when you take a class that isn't your specific type of writing or style of writing or how you envision writing. It just broadens your perspective. That's always a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. So that phrase, genre of writing, is a fancy French word that means kind or type. It's different kinds of writing. That's all. Good writing is good writing.
Hmm.
Bad writing is bad writing. Read good writing and learn from good writing. And you know what that is. I can't tell you what that is. You know yourself, right? It's like music. If you can do whatever you want. If you are a mystery writer or a fantasy writer or whatever, and you only want to read that stuff and you want to hang out with other fantasy writers and mystery writers and write really great mysteries, that's great. That will help you. But reading good writing is reading good writing. It's like music. You probably don't only listen to, early acoustic Neil Young, right? Some of you don't know who Neil Young is. But there's some great electric Neil Young out there too, and other musicians and so on and so forth, right? So good music is good music. Good writing is good writing. It always helps. And as I said at the beginning, I always go back to story. Story is always in your writing, and good story helps you write whatever it is that you want to write. Judy, do you have a question?
I want to say something about good writing though. But there's something to be said for reading your own writing when it's not good. There's something to be said for and workshops can help with this, to sort of recognize what it wants to be. See the stuff that, sometimes I call it the heat or what have you, so that draft works can be very frustrating when you're by yourself because the familiarity is, becomes so intense and it's hard to, but I think one of the things that workshops or at least interchange with other writers can do is have you read your work with some distance and with a critical eye, so that you don't have that pathos of being, oh, this is just a lot of crap. You have, well, this is crap, but there's something here. And this is an idea that I want to develop, so that it is, again, less about performance in that sense of immediacy. Like I've been to workshops where everybody is on point, especially poets, man, they're notorious for this. So anytime you share some prompt, they're going to come out with something, that's Robert Frost like, or whatever, how they're just going to kill it. That's not really what I'm after in a workshop or after, but I do want to see that sort of imperfection where I can see, but there's the idea, there's the seed, there's the thing they can work with. And sometimes that communal environment facilitates that better than when you're just by yourself with your third draft of your whatever it is.
Hang on. Let me get closer here.
As the target audience.
Start over again.
I wanted to ask what our children's book author, what age group she targeted, whether it's fiction, whether it's nonfiction, whether it's a picture book, whether it's a chapter book.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I wrote it for my kids. I'm not that creative of a thinker. I was like, what do my kids like to read? I'll write that. So I have at the time that I wrote it, I had a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. So my age range, most kids' books are within a 4 to 5 year range. So I wrote it for 4 to 8. Yeah, now I have 6, 8, and 18 months because we had a little surprise. Yeah, but it's it's a picture book. It's called Buzz the Not So Brave. It's about my quarter horse. Yeah, so it's nonfiction. It's embellished nonfiction, I should say, because it's, over the top, but I put like a glossary in the back of like horse terms and things like that, because I wanted it to be kind of semi-educational. So that's a piece of it, but yeah, thanks for asking.
All right. We're gonna take one more question because it's 7 o'clock and we've got one from online. And we want to get home before the roads freeze too hard. So Linda has asked, has anyone taken a workshop from someone that has helped them actually get published, not just write better?
I've given that workshop. When's the next one? Yeah. It's not the goal of the workshop.
You wanna talk about that a little bit? So that's a sort of a flip answer.
But I think what Linda, what I'm gonna guess you're asking is, were there actual pieces of the workshop in place in order to aid and abet publication? And that's a rare animal from my perspective. I mean, I have in workshops, I have had writers where a piece of work feels finished and ready to submit, and I've had suggestions for whom they might talk to or whom they might contact or where they might send it. But I don't know that I have any truck with any workshop that's specific. Now, that's not that they don't exist. So Authors Publish, which is an online organization, does do they're not cheap. I think they're more intensive engagements, and they run different genres, run several weeks. There is a huge amount of feedback given by that author, and very frequently they will author certain paths to possible publication. So I know that Authors Publish does that work. And then, of course, there are a lot of specific workshops about publishing, which is still pretty much you're on your own. But I think, with a little research, you can sort of find the people who are trying to at least encourage, because one of the hardest parts about publishing pieces and even larger works is who do you talk to? Who is interested in this? Publishing world is, the word vast came up. It's vast. So even that help can be worth it, the time and money. But I'm not sure. Anybody else might know. I know Authors Publish does a little bit of that.
I have a thought for you. Sorry, I have a tickle. So what started me on trying to publish the memoir that didn't get published, so take this with a grain of salt, is, excuse me, an organization called Punchline Publishers. Excuse me, I have a tickle. Thank you. So look them up. They actually have a cohort that's coming up in March. And I'm gonna see time because I took. Excuse me. All right. Yeah, I just got something in my throat.
Maybe we can put that in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
There they go.
they left. Oh, thank
Watch
you.
it with-
I will put, will you put it in the chat? Or, okay. I don't know that it matters a whole lot, but as Irene mentioned, I took a workshop with, I think it was American Short Fiction, and they worked on the story and gave us feedback and all that sort of stuff. And at the end, they listed 4 or 5 publications that they would recommend. I think maybe what you're getting at, Linda, is there are MFA programs that sort of enlist agents and publishers and that sort of stuff. I don't know of workshops that do that. If they exist, and probably some of the really high-end workshops in this country probably have agents and publishers that hang out there and that you can meet. That's the direction towards publication. When you say has helped them actually get published, as Irene said, we, in the Forge, we have a section in there that talks about how to do it yourself. Whether somebody's going to publish you or not, that's a different animal. But yeah, I think there's probably, you can pay people to help you publish. And that could be the focus of their workshop. Any thoughts on this yourself? No. Kat, any insight on?
Can I add something?
Yep.
I know, I'm not on the panel.
That's all right.
But I gave a workshop for Southern California Writers Conference, and that's how I met David Crow. And I ended up editing David Crow's memoir, and he's sold like 150,000 copies now. And I got him published. So, I mean, sometimes it just depends on you taking courses and your work connecting with whoever is giving a workshop and the kinds of connections they have, if that makes sense. So I'm not sure that it's possible to take a class, a workshop where people are going to get you published unless they connect with your work. Because the bottom line is it's always about the work. So, which is one of the reasons you take workshops to strengthen your writing and, you know, share it and get other people excited about what you're doing. Not that you have that in mind when you're taking the workshop, but part of taking workshops is connecting with other people and connecting with other people in the industry.
Yeah, I think that's really key. And thanks, Trish, for sharing that.
Oh, and one more thing, we are going to have a conference here in Central Oregon with agents and, you know, all of that stuff here in September in Redmond. So, so you'll have that opportunity if that's what you're looking for. You'll get a lot of help with that.
So thanks, Trish. So as Trish was saying, you know, working with an editor, working directly with an editor, or that sort of thing can move you in that direction. But it is all about connections. It's about finding people, and it's who you know, and it's what you know, agents, publishers, whatever. They'll look at your stuff and they'll go, oh, "That's kind of interesting," or you corner them by the coffee machine at some event or something like that. So
Or the bar, often
or
at
the
the
bar.
bar.
the bar would be better. Kat, any thoughts on that one?
I agree with what everyone had to say. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, it is 7:10. Thank you all for sticking with us as long as you did. I hope that the weather or doesn't warm up, but is not dangerous and icy and everything. So everyone drive safe. Thanks for coming from the comfort of your home. As I mentioned, next month, Sydney Swanson will be our speaker. Lots of events on our website. Oh, you know what else? I'm going to say this out loud here, and I'll send an email out, but Touchmark is looking for authors to come and read to the residents there. If anyone is interested in doing that, just email us at centraloregonwritersguild.com. It's not paid, but if you have books that you want to sell or share, they'd be happy to allow you to sell those there. So I'll send an email out to the membership on that too. So
Excellent.
okay. That's all I know. Thanks everyone for coming. Have a great night.
Thank you, Mike.
All right. Thanks, Kat.
Good, everyone.